So, welcome to this Tao of Democracy and Beyond, which we've called a gathering of hearts and minds. So, this is the second of three gatherings, which we designed to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the publication of the book, The Tao of Democracy, written by Tom and Rosa back in 2003, and which has inspired so many to reflect, imagine, and enact new collectively wise ways of doing democracy and governance. We felt this year would be an important year to look back and celebrate this and other important Co-Intelligence Institute milestones, such as the Storyfield Conference, which we held back in 2007, Phoenix Conversations Gathering, 2008, the creation of the Wise Democracy Pattern Language, which was 2017. And most of all, we want to celebrate and gather with fellow travelers on the journey, which is why we sent out the invitation to friends old and new. And Natalia is sending out again right now, probably. So we see this as an opportunity for people to connect with each other and reconnect with CII as an extended community around some of our core themes and inquiries. So what we're going to be exploring today is the topic of the power of stories, the stories we tell ourselves about our shared future. And we're going to be looking at questions such as, what are the old narratives we need to hospice? What are the new narratives? What new narratives are offering us seeds of possibility in life? So thank you for joining us. And I'm now going to hand over to Natalia, who's going to do a brief welcome and introduction.
Hey, so hello. Welcome everyone. Whether you're watching the recording or you're with us live, we're really happy to be with you all today. And I just want to invite us to take a moment to really arrive and ground ourselves collectively and individually into the focus of today's gathering as we begin to reflect on the importance of stories to our lives and to our collective futures. So, as Andy mentioned, the topic for this gathering is the power of stories, of the stories that we tell ourselves about our shared future. And really, this is an invitation to all of us to examine some of the old narratives that we need to hospice and heal, and also to explore what are the new collective stories and narratives that offer us seeds of possibility and new ways forward. So I want to start us out with just a bit of a reflection on the power of story, giving us a space to think about and bring awareness to all of our human stories. Our collective stories, our personal stories, all the stories that we are living inside of and co-creating in every moment, and the stories that are really shaping our world and our sense of possibility and our shared future. As I look out at our history and the present moment and all of our attempts at collective sense making for the coming future, we see so many examples of stories that offer incredible possibilities of transformation, expansion, and conscious evolution. And we see stories that limit us, our sense of who we are and what might be possible. We see so many examples. We see stories of our intelligence and creativity, of our innovation and determination, stories of our wisdom and love and understanding, stories of our vulnerability and our connection, of compassion and care, stories about our human nature and what is fundamental and emergent within us. And we also see stories that we have about what life is and how life works, about life as a place of competition, violence, or survival of the fittest, and life as a natural, emergent, co-creative process, a cycle, a spiral, or a weave. We see stories of competition and conflict and greed, and stories of cooperation, collaboration, and co-creation. We see stories about our roles and our identities, about who we are and what we are capable of. Are we material? Are we spiritual? Are we both? Do we have souls? Do we have real awareness? Are we natural? Are we basically good? These stories of who we are and who we are not define and shape our understanding of each other, of our roles, of our shared and personal sense of what is possible and how we might interact and engage with each other and with life. And we have stories of non-belonging, of isolation and disconnection, of feeling lost and alone and set apart or above. And we have stories of belonging and wholeness, belonging to each other, to our planet, to our ecosystems, and to all of life. We have stories of fracture and conflict, polarization and hatred. And we have stories of wholeness and health and emergence and togetherness. In every moment, we have opportunities to choose our stories, to choose the stories that will shape our shared lives, our shared understanding and intelligence, and our collective choices towards a shared future. So I want to invite you to just rest in for a moment with a real awareness that in every moment we have opportunities to choose our collective stories, to better shape our future and deepen our understanding of who and why we are here and of what we are all doing together and where we belong. So I want to invite us all into a minute of silence. And in this silence, I really invite you to reflect on the stories that you might be holding and that you might be bringing with you into this gathering about yourself and about your identity, about where and with whom you belong, your stories about other people, about life, and about our shared future. So just settle in, I'll ring us in, and then I'll ring us out. And just take a minute. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So in just a moment, we're going to move into breakout rooms to do a check-in and say hello. And in your check-ins, I invite you to share, if you like, maybe one of the stories about yourself or a story about who we are, about our shared future, or what's happening right now in the world that is really inspiring or meaningful to you right now. So Andy, if you can help move us into.
If anyone would like to share out from their check-ins, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, we're going to be moving into a short panel on the power of story. Welcome, Kevin. Good to see you. Yes, Karen.
Yes, I would like to share something from our breakout because I wanted to share something that involved Tom Atlee, and I figured everybody should probably hear this by way of the power of emergence and serendipity. And Tom, I don't know if you remember this, but when we were at the Naropa University, we were you and Peggy were being shown around by the head of the English department or whatever, and I happened to notice this woman, the secretary, at a desk on a landing, and there was something about her that had me want to walk over to her. And I started the conversation and I said, "How are you?" And she goes, "Oh, I am so much better than I was last night." And I said, "Oh, what happened last night?" She said, "I was in tears. I've been depressed. It's like, oh my God, what's happening to this world?" And then I picked up this book and I read it all night, and it has completely changed my life. And I said, "Whoa, what book was that?" And she said, "It's a book called The Tao of Democracy." Now, Tom was standing about 20 feet from me at the time, and he walks over about that point. And I say to this woman, I said, "Well, would you like to meet the author of that book?" And Tom shows up. And of course, it was one of those serendipitous moments.
I didn't remember all the details. I do remember seeing this book on this woman's desk and was going, "Whoa, interesting," out of the blue. That's a great story. Thanks.
It is a great story, and it is all about the power of emergence. And so that's what I bring to this group. That's why I wanted to be part of it, is because I have had so many experiences like that. But this one happened to be involving you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing that story about emergence and about the impact that what we do can have. Because I know that as authors, we don't often necessarily feel like our work is having a difference, right? We write a book, we put it out into the world, and we don't really know how many people's lives it touches. So it can be really meaningful when we hear stories like that. So for our panel, we're going to start with Andy. He's going to be the warm-up act, and then we're going to go to Tom, and then I'm going to say a few words at the end to transition us into the open space like we did last time, where we're going to propose different topics for our smaller group conversations. So, Andy, would you like to start us off?
Yes, I would. And I'm going to start off with an impromptu story that just emerged during our breakout because I don't know when, but I think it was a few months ago. I was in a gathering of people in an Indian restaurant, and there was somebody next to me. We had a nice chat, and I think I mentioned the Co-Intelligence Institute and some of the work I did. And that person happened to be John, who's now on his bike. So I hope I don't disturb him because I don't want him to have an accident, but he's now joined us this evening. So, nice connection there that was made and somebody joining us tonight. So moving on from that, I'd just like to offer something that I read today that I thought was really relevant for this evening, for today's gathering. And it's a brief excerpt from an article called "The World is Made of Stories." And it's by a Zen Buddhist teacher and writer called David Loy. So he says, "It is with our stories that we make sense of the world. We do not experience a world and afterward make up stories to understand it. Stories teach us what is real, what is true, and what is possible. They are not abstractions from life, though they can be that. They are necessary for our engagement with life. Unaware that stories are stories, we usually experience them as the world. Like fish that do not see the water they swim in, we normally do not notice the medium we dwell within. We take for granted that the world we experience is just the way things are. But our concepts and ideas about the world, like the stories they are part of, strongly affect our perception of reality. In Buddhist practice, one learns early on and then continually the truth of my favorite bumper sticker. Don't believe everything you think. This recognition may lead to the wish to strip away any and all accounts of the world and return to the reality behind them, to get back to the bare facts of experience. But that too is enacting a story, the story of letting go of stories. The point here is not to deny that there is a world apart from our stories. Rather, is to say that the way we understand the world is by storying it. Unlike the proverbial fish, however, we can change the water we swim within. Our relationship with stories can be transformed. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Tom.
Thank you. I knew David Loy, and I'm fascinated, and I wonder if he picked up some of, because it's straight out of my story theory stuff. Wow, what a trip. There is a wise democracy pattern explicitly about story, and I'll post that in the chat here if you want to explore this more. I'll post a few other things soon. You've taken half the steam out of the beginning of what I was going to say, a sense that everything has a story and is a story. My realization about this came in a bus in Berkeley. I was already studying story, and there were poems that were put up on the buses along with the advertisements. And I look up from the seat I'm sitting in, and I see the world is made of stories, not atoms. Muriel Rukeyser. My only disagreement with that is that it's made of atoms too, but the atoms have stories. It's like the one of my introductions to the great story of evolution, which Karen and I were part of. Karen Cuddebue's here, when with Michael Dowd and Connie Barlow. I had watched Connie do a talk with these teachers about how to teach the story of evolution to kids. And she holds up a glass of water that she's drinking, and she says, the hydrogen in this water was made very shortly after the Big Bang. It's that old. There's been no new hydrogen created in the universe since then. So that's really old, 13.7 or 8 billion years old, that hydrogen. And the oxygen in this was made in the belly of red giant stars that lived and died before our sun was born. These stars created the oxygen out of hydrogen and helium and then blew up, and that dust, we are stardust. All those pieces of what we call atoms and molecules were blown out of these stars and reconfigured by gravity, and we are that. And that's a story, and all those atoms in it are story. And each of the atoms in us is supposedly every 7 years, all the atoms in it are switched with other atoms. So we're like a candle flame flowing through, and that that sense of being a story, and everything that we are and everything around us is a story. I call story reality. And lived stories are those stories. And that part of my book, the Evolutionary Reflections on Evolutionary Activism, was based in the sense that coming out of Michael and Connie's work, Great Story of Evolution, is we are evolution. That's a story. Evolution is itself a story from the Big Bang. This is what the Big Bang looks like now. Big Bang wasn't something that happened long ago. It never stopped. This is what it looks like now. And just walking around with that consciousness, a whole different world. And so that's a lived story. You can live into it. And the sense that the universe has this creative power, you can put it outside the universe you want. And I playfully call it the great CPU, the creative power of the universe, in my book. And that we are that, to use that language of Hinduism, we are that. We're not separate from that. We are creating the next stages of evolution with everything we do all the time, and sort of becoming aware of that and doing that intentionally is what the evolutionary activism is all about. Yeah, and the sense and when lots of people share stories and are co-creating them and being impacted by them, I call that a story field. It's like similar to a cultural narrative, but like the sense that the feminist story has grown to challenge the patriarchal story field, and how the Trumpist story field has taken over the lives of millions. And I talk about the American way of life is a story field. And if you look at the initials, it's really great. AWOL, AWOL. The idea of a career is a story field. It's just everybody's growing up thinking they need a career, and the career involves this, and you're going to play this heroic role in your career. You're going to move through it and do this, that, and the other. And that's a story field that we all share. As a career is part of your life. The green story field has many embedded stories with sustainability, regenerativity, water is life, renewables, Mother Earth, all that adding up together into this field. It's like a magnetic field where the magnet is shaping the behaviors of all the particles in it, and the particles in it are shaping the magnetic field. It's a two-way kind of thing. And that idea of story fields, why we did a story field conference for 5 days of open space back in 2007, was, is it possible to consciously intervene in a story field and shape it, which is a very theoretically high leverage of shift in the society if you can pull it off. And I'm living in a great story of the meta crisis right now, the emergence of all these crises that are adding up together. The inequity, climate, nuclear war, AI, all these technological challenges, and the recognition that they all come from the same source. And to be living in that and going, how do I want to live, participate in that? So that's how I come to the world of theory of story. I will put into the blog post the 6 dimensions of the story field paradigm, the story paradigm that I've developed, and the co-intelligence site that has it. And also I looked at the pattern language and found 5 categories of patterns that are speaking about story. And I'll put all of that into the blog post now so you can follow up on it. But my time has long since run out, and I sense some signs, so letting go.
You're good, Tom. I do want to mention, I will ask Andy, could you put for people who just got here, could you put again in the chat the document, the shared Google Doc where we're doing a shared harvest? Tom, you don't need to worry about that, but we're going to be taking whatever you put in the chat and going ahead and putting it in that document. But I also want people to see what that document is in case any of you want to add anything to it. Thanks so much, Andy. So, Tom, your story related patterns, in addition to the one that is specifically on story, there's a lot of story related patterns that you picked out. And then the 6 dimensions of the CI co-intelligence story paradigm, and you gave a link to that. Is there anything else, a sentence or two in closing?
I guess not. I had another thing I was going to think is just looking at the role of story in the Israeli-Palestinian Hamas thing that's going on. It's like these people are living in story fields, and these story fields don't match. And the funny sense that if there was a massive enough intervention where they could realize they're living in a story and hear each other's stories, that might have a profound impact on what's happening. I know a lot of that has happened at the, in the grassroots kind of level, but the sense of the potential for addressing things like that seems so unaddressable. Check.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's a great transition. So I'm going to go next. I'm going to offer about 5 minutes of material, and then I'm going to transition us into the figuring out the small group conversations that we might want to be in. But I want to start out with I really fell in love with Tom's draft manuscript of the Tao of Democracy. I was instrumental in helping edit it and publish it, but Tom had written many different versions of it before I ever met him, and just not figured out how to publish them. So, but one of the things that I fell in love with in terms of the content of the Tao of the Democracy is how Tom was sharing stories of things that people were doing on the ground that were examples of this.
I want to do a little correction to that, because the book, there was a point in the book where you said, it's great, Tom, but it needs more stories. And that not only got more stories, but changed the whole theory of what was being put in the book.
Yes, but before that, so I said that about this little part that had to do with citizen councils, and then that little part grew into a much bigger part. But even before that, when you were describing examples of co-intelligence, right, you had examples of a woman in Philadelphia who had this wonderful cafe that she ran in this Judy something or other, that she ran in this very alternative way, and you saw that as an example of co-intelligence. And you had so many examples of people doing things that to you were an instance of this pattern that you were developing, a very powerful pattern of co-intelligence, right? And so and then you've done that with the Wise Democracy pattern language too. Each of the cards, each of the pattern cards has examples of places where you see people embodying this pattern, or organizations or projects embodying these patterns. So I am going to do a little bit of that right now. I'm going to be sharing with you guys some of the things around story that are most exciting to me these days, these things that people are doing in the realm of story. And I also want to say that part of the reason that I want to share these is because the story I like to tell myself is that these are all seeds that have sprouted from initiatives like your Storyfield conference and maybe others. I was not there. I was newly married and new stepmom, and I did not go to the Storyfield 2007 conference. But I know that many people, in fact, I've heard that just about everybody who went felt it was a very powerful experience, except for Tom, and that's another story about your own sense of disappointment and what you were expecting, et cetera. But I would hope that some of these examples, I'm gonna screen share, that some of these examples that I'm going to share here are, whoops, I need to, I don't want to share that right now. I want to open it up first. I hope that these examples will give you a sense that in some way you catalyzed a lot. Because right now there is a tremendous amount of work happening in the realm of stories. And sometimes it's hard to know, who planted this seed or whatever, but I'm going to claim at least some of this energetic sprouts based on the work that you did. So this is the Collective Imagination Practice Community. This is a UK effort that be part of a network of imagination practitioners learning together, and they have a fund because in the UK they fund wonderful things to evolve the practice of collective imagination. This is a Medium post that I first saw a while back, and I have not been able to, and I shared it in our newsletter, I shared it with other people here. I haven't been able to participate as much as I would like, and I'll say more about why in a little bit. But recently, they've created a seed planting scrapbook. So a document where people can document how they're planting these seeds of metaphor, just all these experiments that people are doing with how do we collectively imagine stories together. So I will share links with all of that in the document after. But then at some point, I became super excited because I found out about this project, which is actually happening in the US. And I was going through this phase where I felt like everything cool is happening, groovy is happening in the UK. But this Horizons project is actually happening here. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. They do a lot of work with story. And this is their email archive. This is just their most recent email. They have a newsletter called The Vista. And speaking of what you were saying, Tom, about the they have a lot of information. Oh, here we go. Greater Good Science Center. Greater Good, this is science-based insights for meaningful life. Greater Good resources for peace and conflict. They gathered articles that explore the roots of peace, war, and reconciliation, offer resources for well-being and activism, and remind us of human goodness, right? So this is a resource that you would find out if you subscribe to Horizons Project newsletter. Of course, you should also subscribe to the CII newsletter, right? This is a win-win here, but it's just a very wonderful resource. And one more thing mentioned in that issue, just to kind of encourage you to subscribe to their work, an article on conditions to flourish, understanding the ecosystem for narrative power, right? So there's more. I mean, I could go on and on and on, not just the stuff that they catalog, but yeah. So if you want to connect with a lot of great initiatives on story, check out the Horizons Project, check out the Collective Imagination Practice Community, and a third one. Part of the reason I've not been able to get so involved with this is that I am a visiting fellow at the Ash Center at the Harvard Kennedy School this year, where I've had the great honor and pleasure of meeting Marshall Gantz, who was an organizer for the United Farm Workers, and his Wikipedia article, I highly recommend it, describes the 4 courses that he teaches at the Harvard School of Government. One is called Public Narrative, Self, Us, and Now. And I dropped in on a class. I'm auditing it. I just started auditing it mid-semester. I wish I had known about it earlier. But so he's talking about what is the story of self that I want to share with other people. This is his basic framework for organizing. What is the story of self? What is the story of now? What's the crisis that we are facing? And what's the possibility that could happen? And what's the story of us? Like, how can we he talks a lot about the empathic bridge. How can we create a story of all of us in this together and the potential that we have to make a change? And then next semester, he offers one called Public Narrative, Conflict, Continuity, and Change, Organizing, People, Power, and Change. And the last 2 are the executive ed version and the students. Anyway, Marshall Gantz, another person who's doing a tremendous amount of work. And if you look him up online, I can't put the link to this because it's one of those things that when you click on it, it just downloads a PDF, but he has a leadership framework primer. Whoops, that's not it, that you can download. So those are the 3 resources: the Collective Imagination Project, the Horizons Project, and Marshall Gantz's work that I wanted to share about amazing things that are happening right now with regards to the power of story in the world. And there are many, many, many more. And I am completely convinced, Tom, that many of these either materially or energetically came out of your 2007 Storyfield Conference, because I know that a lot of people walked away very inspired by your ideas about how we can shift, consciously intervene in the story field and change it. And there are many people who are working on that now. So that's it for my little mini presentation. Andy, you're going to be sharing with us the the mural in which we're going to be taking notes of any topics that people are going to be sharing with us in terms of what conversations would you like to pursue. And so that's the place where you're going to be taking notes. I want to see if, why don't you stop sharing for a moment so that people can just have a chance to respond to your presentation, to Tom's presentation, to any of the resources I shared, and then you can be taking notes on that. And in a moment, once it's a little bit more populated, we can start to share that again. Does that sound like a good plan?
Sure. So we're inviting a space for people to respond to, oh, sorry, for me to respond.
For anyone to respond to Tom's presentation, your presentation, the resources I shared, and it can be a response, and it can also be something you'd like to go further on, like a proposal for a small group topic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think for me, what's standing out, like now that we're focusing on story, is something new that's coming up for me. That's you know, this the power to shift, the power to it's like the Donatella Meadows paradigm shift. You know, that if you want to have the biggest leverage on a system, it's like getting into the story of that system and trying to create ways of shifting that. So that's what emerging for me there. And yeah, thank you, Rosa, for the, you know, those resources that you shared around examples of people working to do that, highlighting the fact that Tom has been doing this for some time. And yeah, I'm really curious about what's going to emerge here amongst us, what stories people have to share and what they'd like to look at.
Thank you.
So are there any reflections from what you heard just now from others?
I guess I have a question because I feel like I'm kind of coming into this, not having done a lot of direct involvement with CIIS for a long time. But I'm curious as to when we speak about the story field and the power of story and a collective awakening to possibility, to what degree David Boehm's work on consciousness and his conversations with Krishnamurti, for example, might have some bearing here, where human consciousness is not linear. Human consciousness absolutely works more at a quantum mechanics level. And if it's human consciousness that has the possibility to emerge newly, instead of being locked into a linear kind of story, I'd just be curious about whether CIIS or any of you have been involved in those kinds of conversations.
I was involved in Bohm dialogue group in the early 90s. And part of the assumptions of that was that to the extent we're trapped, it's because of assumptions. Assumptions are transparent. You look through them, you don't know you have them. And they're assumptions about what's real and all that. They're boxes that we're in without knowing we're in them. The old fish in the water kind of thing. And Bohm dialogue focused on suspending those assumptions. If you have the assumptions, you can't see them, but somebody else who doesn't have the same assumptions can see them really well. So having a bunch of people talking together about whatever subject and then noting, not doing anything with it, but just noting there's an assumption there, you know, identifying what it is, let it be, move on the conversation. And the theory was if the same group of people do this over and over and over again, they will start to be aware of the role of assumptions and be able to free them from those, and that the collective consciousness that we all share, but assume that we're separate, will start to be present in the group. That was my awareness of David Bohm and Krishnamurti's theory of an intervention into that dynamic. And I had wild experiences. That's a whole nother story, but wild experiences in that group doing that kind of work. But yes, that is a dimension that can be intervened in.
Thanks so much. John, thank you for coming on screen. Would you like to share something?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have anything coming immediately to mind.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay. Welcome. Yes, Alon?
Yes, I have a question or an observation about the notion of recycling of stories. I'll take a personal example. I was brought up in a small village in the northeastern part of France. So living in close community, my grandmother had 13 brothers and sisters. And the role of elders in that community was very, very strong. And here I am now doing some work with elders on trying to create a community of regenerative elders, initially virtually, but hopefully locally as well. Like in Portland, we are looking at the possibility of doing so. So when I read, what do we do with all narratives and new narratives? For me, that all narrative of where I come from is actually, I am trying to actualize it in my world at this time, from the northeastern part of France to Portland, Oregon. So there seems to be, I'm wondering whether we can actually not recycle, but update and make real some old stories that influence very deeply our childhood, for instance. So I just want to offer that as a thought.
And
Thank you so much.
Recycling works as a metaphor also. It's maybe different from yours, but the sense of what happens in digestion and what happens in recycling as things are taken apart and recreated in new ways. So you're recycling paper, and the paper is getting smushed and becoming a different kind of paper and whatever. And I think that's a very good metaphor. And the idea of recycling, how many different ways might you recycle a story, would be a very fruitful exploration. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
We're in the process of recycling the story of America right now. And there's lots of stuff surfaces when you try and do that. And it's healthy transition, but it's extremely chaotic and confusing and dangerous.
If I may add, Tom, from that perspective, I'm following Jim Kenney in him looking at QAnon and the religious right, etc. I'm wondering how much of what is happening on that front in the US now is due to the origin of this country being created by, initially at least, by a number of sects, people who were ostracized in their own country and wanting to, and so it seems to me, in contrast with France, for instance, that religious dimension, that being part of is something that is resurfacing in this country, has been probably always there. But since you mentioned recycling U.S. history, I'm puzzled by this. How much of that is due to, not due, but linked directly to the origin of this country.
Funny, because there's both a groundedness in their own religion, which is why they came here,
Yeah.
and the reason that we were trying to make a country out of all that made the separation of church and state, which is also being rebelled against. They want their religion in charge. It's a
Indeed.
very, really intriguing, that story has been recycled into two different, very different dimensions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's coming for me, and so I'm stepping out of my facilitator hat here for a moment and just more as a participant, but what's coming for me is, you said that, Alon, is how trauma that we experience then can be repeated towards others, right? So we're seeing that in the Mideast War, but also in the history of our country, that this country was founded on religious persecution, and now people are persecuting others for their not belonging to the same religious faith. So that's very interesting. And Natalia is reminding me that we should invite people who have not spoken yet to see if they would like to speak.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not on camera. And I just, coming from very different culture. I'm originally from Shanghai. I lived, I moved to Switzerland in my teen years. So I've kind of, I've had a cross-cultural upbringing. And so I just want to say, I think, Tom, you talked about assumptions, and I think, when people from, totally different culture are kind of hear those stories, or, they would see those assumptions even more clearly, and so for whatever eventually that, like people from my culture, or whoever who haven't been in touch very much, in touch with Western or Western cultures, they would eventually, just get to a point where they would be things that they don't understand, right? It was just like, okay, it's not logical, based on their own assumptions, where they come from. So, and if they're, points of kind of not understanding fully what other people are saying, that could just be a good source of reflection, just saying, oh yeah, what does it come from? And if people can go back, and you talked about recycling, and just let things, resurface, as you said, and see what was really at the origin of all that, that could be, I think, quite interesting. Because obviously it came somewhere somehow, right? And people kept repeating it, or telling the same stories again and again, and that would just adding more layers, and it comes something that is kind of but still what I was saying, meaning is the core of it is still there somehow.
So Ying, I would love to reflect to see if I'm understanding. You're bringing out that when we have people who have come from very different cultures, we might not all share one another's assumptions, and we might not all share one another's origin stories. And so asking questions about where assumptions or stories are coming from could be a really good way to uncover some of the layers and develop greater understanding. Is that close?
Yeah, and it's a way of getting to know, ourselves. I mean, if people are just willing to really hear and look into what's there, I think, and that could be just quite a radical way eventually, just to. But they're fears, right? As you were saying, they're fears, they're things that we don't want to touch unconsciously, even, and we would just skip, or they're already story that are ready just to say, oh, it's not this, it's not that, and and we just go into same stories again.
I realized that one way, in addition to looking for where did that come from, if you say something to me and has assumptions that I'm not totally aligned with, so I recognize there's assumptions in there. If I say in response, I'm telling myself a story that blah 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 blah, it's like a different narrative version of an iMessage, but it's owning the story. And if there's a group of people and one person is saying something, whatever they're saying, and other people say, when I hear that, I'm telling myself a story that blah blah blah, and then other people can respond to that and say, I'm telling myself. It reinforces the fact that we're all telling stories and there's no solid thing that's absolute truth here, but you learn a whole lot about what people are thinking as stuff unfolds among them. That we're starting to stumble into interesting ways to experiment in digesting or recycling stories. I like it. Okay.
I want to piggyback on that a little bit, because I'm imagining, I do like coaching and counseling with people, and a lot of it is about unpacking the stories and assumptions and limiting beliefs and all of that people are bringing to all of our situations about ourselves, about the world, about each other. And I'm wondering, what if beyond this field where we create this awareness about all the stories we're holding, what if we had an effort to generate new stories that we collectively together that would be more generative and emergent? And I know, like, some of the examples you shared, Rosa, are examples of that, but I'm wondering, like, even as a group, if beyond just unpacking the stories and assumptions that we're carrying with us, we actually generate together new assumptions, new stories, ones that are more supportive, more connective. Check.
Thank you, Natalia. Yes, John? I see you have your hand up, Elaine, but
I'm beginning to speak without a clear map of where exactly it will take me to. But what I'm responding to is this phrase about shifting. Oh, by the way, is it okay if I introduce you? I'm here with my housemate Ben. So I've got home and we are here together. In fact, here we are. This is a nice example. This is our living room. This is where we live together. This is part of a shared house. This is an interesting practice to me, acknowledging context, like seeing the broader picture. That's interesting to me. Is it a storytelling practice? It's a way of embedding the implicit story in a wider context. It's a way of shifting the frame of the story, altering it in as it is unfolding and being told. Okay, moment of deceleration. You spoke, Natalia, about being a counselor, being a coach, and helping people to unpack and examine, and use this phrase, carrying stories, things that we're, it's funny, right? Unpacking, that's the metaphor. We've all got our big rucksacks or whatever. And I was thinking about this coaching certification that I'm right at the beginning of undertaking. So I don't have experience yet working in that field. But the paradigm in which I'm being educated, I suppose, or eventually certified, was brought to mind by what you said. This potential to uncover things and like look underneath things. It's turtles all the way down kind of thing. Or this tendency to point the camera around the room. I think that might do it for me for now. Here, this is the thought that I can grasp. I've just also remembered a fun detail from the evening when Andy and I met, and it came to me from this gesture of grasping. We were both there at the invitation of a third person, who on that evening was telling us about how he disliked the class which he and I had been attending together. Now, he said this with a particular way. He said, "This guy is just a bad teacher. He's just a bad teacher," he said. And I was like, "Oh, okay." What do you mean by that? Like, and he said, "Oh, he's a great mover. He's a great dancer, but his explanations weren't clear." Okay, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this is juicy. This is juicy to me." And the insight that came to me from this process, and which I wasn't able to share at the time, was something about the different way that I experienced the first phrase, "He's a bad teacher," or the second phrase, I would have liked his explanations to be clearer." And just to borrow this vocabulary I've been hearing from you, Tom, about metaphor, it seemed to me that this first phrase functioned as a wall, right? Like, you're resonating somehow. The first phrase was a wall, it seemed to me, between the speaker and the teacher. He's a bad teacher. Like, what do you do with that? Like, it's just a brick wall for people to bump up against. Whereas the second sentence strikes me as like a fishing line, a thread that connects us to a potential future which we might wish for. I would have and it takes this differentiation, like, I'm building the wall a little bit. He's a bad teacher. Okay, what's behind that? I didn't like his explanations. Okay, what can we do with that? I would like his explanations to be different in such and such a way. You can keep pulling the thread and seeing what's fertile there, what potential exists there. Okay. Another moment. There's one more thing I feel I'd like to share. And before doing so, I'm going to slow down again. And what's happening for me is I'm letting my eyes go around this space. The tumble dryer's just kicked into gear in the next room. I'm imagining that for each of you, there will be sounds and sights which aren't available to any of the rest of us. So that's my provocation. What can you see if you look away from your screen for a moment? I've been touched by this word emergence, which is being used repeatedly. And what came to mind as I was listening to you, Natalia, was this phrase, initial conditions. That in the context of ongoing growth and change, it can be very worthwhile to look back and uncover things. And if we start from the paradigm that change is ongoing, and we don't have to make it happen by digging back and uncovering what limits us, if we presume that somehow things are emerging ongoingly, then our focus can be on creating the initial conditions that facilitate that. Someone used the phrase conditions for flourishing, right? What is the ecosystem of, and whoever said it can finish that off. But something like that. That's what I wanted to point to as a paradigm of growth. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much, John. Len, did you still want to speak?
Yes, but if Karen wants to connect to what John just said, I'm not. So would you like to go, Karen?
Sure. First of all, maybe some people don't realize that John just bicycled from the school where he teaches 2-year-olds out in the middle of the forest. And I just thought, and listening to you, John, oh my God, I wish I'd had you as my 2-year-old children's teacher. in the forest, and your ability to just take in and articulate, but to feel with your all the senses. So I just want to acknowledge you and who you are working with. And they're very blessed children. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's something about what you are speaking, and I'm also hearing other people speaking about the power of emergence and all this. It's something I work a lot with also. But I'm really reflecting on an old wise Old Testament scholar by the name of Walter Brueggemann. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Walter Brueggemann, because I suspect most of you are not in the churchy worlds, but he is an Old Testament scholar who is absolutely, oh my God, Tom, you and he would talk long into the night. He is a good friend of Ched Myers, and oh my God, all the right people, right? So anyway, what he said is the only hope for America is for us to focus on what is emerging, that is working, that we want more of. And he said, our job is to amplify what is working. Now, what I see us doing, especially the old progressive, anti-war, yada, 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 there's 1,000 things that are not working. But to focus our energies on those things that we want more of, just energetically, I just want to put that down as a piece for all of us to be aware of what happens when we focus on things that are actually working. There's an energy that is released from all of us. So just had to add that to the mix here.
Thanks so much, Karen. Yeah. So there's your next Alana, I just want to interject connected with that. There's a beautiful good book called The Creative Power by William Smith. And he talks about how there's the power of control, there's the power of influence, and there's the power of appreciation. And how appreciation is a real force, is a real power in the world, that what we appreciate will grow and increase. So thank you for bringing that energy in. Yes, Alana.
I want to connect to what Ying was saying about the international, I'm international, I've been an international consultant, but I'm mostly French and American at this time. And I'm struck by the fact that as a Frenchman, that the great replacement theory came from France, came from a Frenchman. And that's a story. Yes, it's a theory, but it's really a story of being really, really concerned about immigration coming into France from North Africa, from Africa, as a former colonizing country. And the fact that it has taken hold in this country. So the power of stories, of archetypes almost, or theories. And what is the difference between a story and a theory? Is to take hold in very different contexts, but there is a resonance that is there. I'm wondering whether there are some comments on that. I've just observed that. And particularly, as I said, because I'm a Frenchman, I'm not happy that it comes from a Frenchman. But I understand it.
Yeah, it's clear these stories are coming from everywhere to everywhere now.
Yeah.
And not just, I mean, ideas and theories, it's definitely, I mean, Marxism, whatever, it's like all over the place. And now stories are from the camera, the video, taking a picture of things. There's stories to every picture that is spread around, has a story behind it. So it's like, yeah, the story ecosystem is throbbing globally.
Patty and Lorraine had raised their hand and we haven't heard from them yet. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I saw that hand raised.
Thank you. I wanted to say, but in my world, that theory is a category of story. A theory is a story. Mm-hmm. And a perception actually is a story. It's my perception is my story of what I see. And I think that's just a huge part of everything. I had a long thing on questions and answers and how important questions are because they open up to possibility, whereas an answer seems to close off the range of possibilities. So when you accept something as an answer, it's the precipitation for action, but at the same time, it closes off the curiosity about other possibilities. So I think that's important, or it has been to me. My favorite mental bumper sticker is question assumptions. I've not seen it anywhere, but I carry it in my head. I don't do it all the time, but I carry it as a possibility. And yeah, that's all.
Thank you. Natalia?
That just made me think of one of the patterns that we have at CII, which is permeable boundaries. And this idea that, I mean, which we've all been acknowledging all along, that we just naturally kind of carry around these stories and assumptions or beliefs or whatever, however you want to refer to them, that like we live inside of these things and they're all around us and they're coming at us from every source. And we can't really make sense or necessarily function as, entities without having these certain realities that they're all stories. And so making this space for there to be permeability, where like the stories are there and we have this awareness that we're living inside of them, but they're not walls. Like John was saying, like it's not a wall that's like shutting off possibility or shutting off being wrong or changing our stories, having them be fluid and flexible and useful to us and pointed towards the things that we want to be creating and generating more of and participating in, rather than as these kind of barriers or boundaries. And I just see, so like when I look out at our cultural life, I see so much stuff that's really grounded in fear and avoidance and aversion, rather than in desire and generativity and creation. And that clearly lives inside all of us. I mean, I see examples of it in everyone that I meet, and in all of you here today. I'm like, yes, I love this. And then I go back out into the world, the modern world, and I'm just like, boundary, fear, scarcity, all of these other stories that feels very restricted and restricting and limiting and fragmenting. So yeah, I don't know exactly where I'm going, but I'll check there.
Thank you, Natalia. I want to suggest something. Andy has been working away, harvesting all the various contributions that people have been offering. And it seems to me that with the size group we have right now, we could just continue our conversation. I don't think we need to break it down into smaller groups and choose topics like we did last time, unless people really want to do that. So it's totally open. But I do think it would be lovely to include Andy a bit more here by inviting him to share his screen, and then having us all look at what's there and see if there's anything that's missing, because it's really hard to do this scribing job as a single person. And he's doing it in service to the group. This is an offering, like here's what I heard. What else? So if we could just take a moment and see if there's anything else that we might want to add to this, because this will be going into our harvest document, and then we can, continue our story. And sometimes also when we look at what's there, it helps us think about what's the next thing that we might want to share. So
yeah, I been doing my best to capture, at least snippets of what's being said. I think sometimes there may be comments that I didn't 100% get in the moment. So anybody sees something that's that looks like it was something they were talking about, but I haven't really captured quite like they'd like to see, do speak up. Can people read it? Is it hard to, let me just see if I can make it a little bigger.
I can read it.
Yep. There we go. Hopefully that's a bit easier to read.
The shifting the frame of a story by sharing a wider context. One, context as story. It's not just background, it has its own story and is story about the story. And also the note that Nora Bateson's Warm Data Labs moves you out. I just realized it shifts you out of a story, single story, into multiple stories, what she calls transcontextuality.
Seeing transcontextuality.
And note, Warm Data Labs is a methodology attached to that activity, or that principle. Thank you.
Whilst sharing like attributions, I'd love to mention that the name of my teacher is Steve Hoskinson. And the name of the method is organic intelligence. And I'm visualizing this is next to the Walter Brueggemann post-it, because the sort of therapeutic paradigm he proposes or is communicating to me and has sourced from his own learning is similar, this thing of focusing on and amplifying what is working. Hoskinson.
Awesome. Thank you. I was stuck there.
Yeah. Your pause was.
And what was the name of the practice or the methodology that you mentioned?
Organic intelligence.
Organic intelligence.
Yeah. Similar to co-intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm. Looks like it.
Yeah, this idea of amplifying, reinforcing what's emerging for a person that's working in any given moment.
Thank you so much. We really see our work as creating spaces where people can share what valuable resources they're finding, right? So really helpful to have the attribution, the name of the practice, etc. Thank you so much.
And we're thinking of doing the last Friday in November, a real world co-intelligence call, inquiring into appreciative capacitance. Capacitance being your ability to hold things that don't settle easily together or feel unsettled, and appreciation. What's the role? How does appreciation intersect with that? And I just thought that the organic intelligence principle is like one of the really important ways that those two principles can be combined.
Yeah, in terms of pattern language, there's the whole positive deviance model of looking for examples of what's working again. It's used a lot in public health. There's the building on strengths model, and then what's the community organizing model? Asset-based community development. Yeah. So it's lovely how these principles work at different levels of scale, right? For personal growth and for doing health policy research and for doing community organizing. Yeah, it's beautiful. Cool. I just want to make
a raised hand.
Oh yes,
Ying, I think.
thank you.
Ying, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I I would just to add that to our conversation is we grew up actually with hearing stories, right? That's how we educate kids, and even to some degree spirituality, it's also made of the stories that at least part of it, it's just stories that we are familiar with, depending on the culture, on again what we be hearing, and eventually what I would and even values, right? Values are story based, and so I think when we talk about spirituality, maybe there's a more humanity centered dimension, and so that makes me think what actually beside the story, how we feel actually when we hear things, right? That's maybe eventually would reflect more what's true, in the sense that our mind is there helping us comprehend things, but the mind is so capable of telling all kinds of stories, including fear-based and all those right. The mind is it's I just wonder how much we can trust it, in the sense that it's just sometimes it can be messy, and so how we feel eventually is maybe a language where more truth can be found, and so yeah, and also things that we recycle, and eventually those things that we don't want, it's also because those are the components, things that we have not tackled really deeply enough, so they're still there, they will resurface over and over again, because we haven't gotten to a point where we just would have made a peace with it, or learned something from it, and then and come up with a different story out of it.
Yeah. Just, I think I'd like to reflect and see if I understood there. I think from what you're saying, Ying, is that there's a possibility to create new stories that by hearing each other, I don't know if I'm correct here, but by hearing each other's stories, by kind of helping us break down our sense of the assumptions and the stories we're telling, that we can create new stories that may be new shared stories that are more that maybe create a greater chance for peace, because we've kind of co-created them somehow by sharing our stories. Is that, don't know if that's connected or relevant to what you were saying.
I think sometimes there are also aspects that we seem to have trouble resolving, and those are interesting aspects we need to focus on. That means we are blocked, we have not moved through what needs to be worked on yet, and that's why it's just it's coming up over and over again, and there's a purpose there. So yeah, sometimes we just need to take a fresher, views on things. So it's just getting out of our collective story and to see things from very different angle. And I think feeding into it really it could help.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that, Ying, and just I can see there are a few people with raised hands, but I'd just like to take off my scribing hat for a moment and just share something that I just want to. I don't know if you can see this here. This is does that show up here? This is a pack of cards called More Than One Story, and you can buy them online, and it's an amazing game. And basically, it's the most simple thing. So let's say you're in a group of people.
We can't see it, just to let you know.
Sorry?
We can't see it. We're still looking at the.
No, I just tried to show it.
Okay.
It's just a deck of cards there. I mean, you probably can't see it so easy because the focus thing is not working so well here. But anyway, I'll share the link to it. But basically, you can have, any gathering. You're going to see people. You're going to immediately start to make assumptions by the way they look, the way they dress, the way they move, the way they talk, and we have this tendency to start making stories about who others are, but I think something that what Yin was sharing there is like, I think we need some ways of finding our shared humanity, like the story of our shared humanity. And these cards are great for that because they just ask really simple questions. Like they ask, for example, you pick up a card and it says, tell about a moment which you'd like to live again. So you get paired up with people. Tell a story about a surprise you had. Tell a story of your choice from an experience in your life, And then when people open up and they start to share these things, it's like, oh, wow, it replaces your theories and your assumptions with something you start to see a human being in front of you. And it's amazing. I've shared this at parties and it just changes the atmosphere where people are sort of a little bit guarded and everything to suddenly there's a sense of connection in the room. So yeah, things that are really simple that bring us back to our humanity, I think can be very, very powerful. So I'll share the link to that in the chat. So, some people
Awesome.
might. Yeah.
Thank you, Andy. I'm going to invite Kevin to speak because we've not heard from him yet. And we're going to have, and I see that Dunia has just joined us. So welcome, Dunia. And just wanting to say that we're going to be, we're going to be wrapping this up in a little bit. So Kevin, and then Karen, and then Alan. Yes.
Thanks, Rosa. Hey, everybody. Just one of the things that I've been experiencing ever since John came on is immense deja vu, which has just been kind of an incredible thing. I don't have deja vu that often. When I do, it just makes me feel, oh, I'm in the right place. But I'm kind of curious where deja vu fits in everybody's story as a concept, just as a thing. But one of the things that keeps coming up for me is time for story. And how much time do we have for story? And that leads to story depth and story breadth, right? We're all living in a fast story world, right? Where we have the ability to have bias confirmation happen, in 2 seconds. And then there is no depth to what has actually happened. And when John was talking, that came up, when he said the friend said, I don't like the teacher that I have. I've just recently left, I've just recently retired, and I was overseeing a group of 300 people that was in a group of, 2,000 people and in a bigger group of 12,000 people. And the stories that get generated constantly for creating meaning in those kinds of environments is fascinating, but there's never enough time to really get to all the depth. And one of the experiences I've always had is that I still have is that most people are not good journalists. And that is in the telling of stories, right? People will, and on some level, most people aren't good headline writers, right? Because they will create a headline that doesn't really give the depth and complexity of what the story is. When people would come, it's like, okay, that's interesting, but like, what are all the bits and bobs underneath that? Because I don't have enough time. Anyway, it's just something that's there for me, and it's just constantly coming up as people are talking about, like, as we're sharing stories, do we share the full depth and the full breadth of the stories? And then I don't know who's Patty and who's Lorraine because I'm going with the names as they are on the screen. But the thing of questions was so great to me because Rosa, when you were talking about the collective imagination or the creative, I can't remember what the name of it is right now, but one of the things that I just became fascinated with when you were talking about that was like, how do we bridge stories and how does somebody take a story and then have interest to go? But coming out of us, I worked in the drug world, medicine world, and we're always looking at mechanism of action and how does this medicine interact with these cells to do all that. But there was this sense of questions as being such a replicant of biological processes of bridging two entities where that question shares your context and opens up the possibility of somebody else sharing their context, and then just this beautiful bridge as a result of questions. It just made me very, very happy to have the thing. And oh, one other thing, Andy, your deck of cards is really great. I just want to share a story of going through hospice training, and it was at a public hospital in San Francisco. That's the old Alms House, that's 150 years old. But one of the things that we did was the people doing the training took pictures of like 25 different kinds of people and laid them out on the ground and asked each of us to have a sense of who that person was, right? Just really getting at all of the stories that we have in our head that we're constantly projecting all over the place, and how, getting back to those assumptions, but how do we hold those, own those, know those, etc., and more. So just a little bit of a ramble, but story time for story and time for depth and breadth of story fascinates me because I think we're all trading in stories constantly. Oh my God, sorry, I just have to say this. Wow. Huh. Sorry. My mom is 86 and my dad died last year. And the emotions are just like kind of a funny thing to hit upon. But like one of the things that I have to give to my mom is story, so that she has the ability to trade in her story fields with the other women and other older men that she knows. It's so, so key to give her currency and relevancy through the stories that I share that then she shares and puts together this whole large story field with all these other people. And it's just become so deeply understood by me that is one of the best gifts that we have for her is stories and stories to share. So
Beautiful, thank you.
I'm complete. Sorry.
Oh,
is it helpful? I just want to check. Maybe it's helpful for
Sorry,
us
Andy. Yeah.
No, I'm asking if it's helpful for me to share the screen. Maybe it's easier if we go back to seeing each other because I can be typing in the background.
Yeah, I'd love to go back to seeing each other while we're sort of sharing these more poignant things.
And just one other thing, Andy, you're doing an amazing job. Just amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I'm not sure I'm catching the depth of everybody's comments, but at least there's some record.
Rosa, you're still muted.
I just want to take a moment for a process pause here, because one of the things I started doing, Andy, is taking notes in the chat so that you don't feel like you have to get it all. So you get what you get. Other people were also putting notes in the chat. John put some beautiful quotes in the chat. And ideally, the harvesting can be more of a collaborative thing. I do want to mention that in the first time that we met for the celebration, part one of the celebration, we have some mural documents, and we also have a mural document that's a sandbox so that people who want to can experiment with it. But you don't have to take notes in the mural. You could also just take notes in the chat, and then we can be collating all of that together. So it doesn't have to fall on one person. So that was the little process thing. So with that, Alan and Karen, and then we have a little CII announcement in a couple minutes. So you will be the last two for now.
Karen, on not you go. I think you were first.
Okay, thank you. Well, there have been so many openings. I felt the openings in myself listening to so many of you as to what can expand and enrich the story field. And there are two that I haven't heard named yet that I think can do more as well. And that is to widen the possibility of generating stories from the future. Actually, how does the future want to be heard and supported in this present moment? And I don't want to say any more than that in the interest of time, but there's a lot there. And that brings in the work of Fred Pollack and Elise Boulding, and I mean on and on and on. Images of the future, the power of the imagery of the future. And then the second thing is, I think what I hear when I hear us speaking about stories up to this point has been mainly stories about humans and other humans. And there's something that happens when we open up the world of the more than human world as supporting us in our emergence as taking our place in the whole community of life, that actually opens it helps to open people's hearts. When people hear stories about the whales, and people hear stories about the octopuses, and people hear about how our own microbiome impacts what we're capable of in terms of our mindsets. So there's just all kinds of worlds that can be opened up by widening the story fields. And those are just two more examples.
Thank you so much, Karen. Yes. Alan, if you could offer a short contribution, because we do have.
Be very short. I'm wondering, we've seen mostly words and heard mostly words at this time. The power of pictures, the power of diagrams to convey a story. And I am reading right now, a little late, Donut Economics, where the author, Kate Raworth, offers a series of pictures to challenge the dominant economics that have been in usage for 80 years or so. And it's so powerful, the donut as a position to a runaway curve of growth, for instance. So I just want to, since it hasn't been mentioned, for me, maybe because I'm very visual, I love pictures as a way to punctuate stories.
Thank you so much. One of the things I want to say in wrapping things up right now is that we really intend these calls to be a way to spark conversations that will then continue. So one of the things that people did last time is somebody said, oh, can we share emails? And so they added their emails, people who wanted to added their emails into the chat. And then we sent out a chat. We sent out an email with everybody's emails who had wanted to share their email to those people who had shared their email, right? So totally optional, no obligation, but that's one way of continuing. The other way of continuing is to add contributions onto the Google Doc, right? Like if there's a thought that you had that, or you want to respond to somebody else's or like that, please feel free to do that as well. But the last thing is a favor that we want to ask you, which we'll also be asking our newsletter subscribers and reaching out to supporters in one-on-one calls, which is that we're entering our end of year fundraising season. And so we would love to know, we're not asking for your money. I mean, although if you want to make a donation, that's great, but we would love your testimony. So if you are willing to write a word or two or a sentence or two about the value that CII's work has for you and share that in the chat. So the question is, what brief statement or even a 2-sentence narrative might you share with a potential funder about the value that CII work has for you? Something that might inspire them to fund us so that we can continue to freely offer gatherings like these. So if you feel open to posting your responses into the chat, we will then use them anonymously in this thing called the Slido poll, which so we'll just like put the statements in there, and then we will share that with her newsletter. And it's this thing that allows other people to go and to upvote or to interact or to comment. So your comments become like kind of like the yeast seed starters to see what else other people might want to add. And so this would be very helpful and much appreciated. And we wanted to just give you a moment or two to do it now so that it doesn't become this thing to do later or like that. So if you would be willing to do that, we will just have a pause for that. And then we'll have our final go round. Ooh, Natalia, may I read what you wrote aloud?
Sure.
CI gives me a place to share my authentic self, to connect with others who also care about the future for all beings and our planet, to engage with and receive the incredible wisdom and insights of others, and to imagine and envision new and brighter possibilities for our shared future. Thank you. It's quite a high bar. You don't have to write something super eloquent. You could just, and you can do this later. We just wanted to see, what, if there was anything that wanted to come now. Karen wrote open-hearted, open-minded, disciplined, curious, committed contributors to our possible futures. Thank you. That's wonderful.
And I'd also invite that you could frame it in terms of maybe what you're walking away from this gathering with, like what feelings or, energies or ideas are you're sort of holding that you've.
Yeah, it can be very present. Like it doesn't have to be about all of our work. It could be, after this gathering, I felt that. Oh, Dunya. CII continually recenters me into what's most important and valuable at this time. It grounds me in wisdom, peace, and possibility, not to mention the deeply knowledgeable and kind community I get to connect with around this work. Thank you. That's super sweet. Okay, well, this isn't meant to torture you. Some things happen slowly, some things happen quickly. No worries if you haven't put anything. And yes, thank you, Andy, for offering an email in case anybody wants to send anything later. Let's just have a word from each person or a gesture or a movement so that it doesn't have to all be words as our closing gift to one another. Who would be willing to start?
I would be willing to start. I was thinking my experience of today is more or less the sum of my experience of CII, and it is an opening. That would be my gesture. It's an opening, a sense of and as people spoke about questions as opening and questions as bridges. So that's what I mean. I'm left with a feeling of curiosity about what may continue to emerge from the seeds planted implicitly and explicitly during this time of communicating with one another.
Thank you so much, John.
That's wild because opening is the word that came to me too. So, oh, John, check.
Tom, do you want to pick the next person to go?
Karen.
Well, my word is centering, and I'm going to use Carlos Vidasi's picture of us being surrounded by the leftover radiation from the Big Bang. We are surrounded by the Big Bang. We are always held in the center of the universe. And that's the image and the word.
Thank you. Could you choose the next person?
I'm going to choose Kevin.
Two words: comfort and great appreciation. 3 words. Alon.
I'll say it in French. Ouverture, which is opening. Thank you. And Dunia.
Merci, Alain. Hmm. I guess my word is peace, and it comes with the Tom knows, and I'll pass it to Natalia.
I think my word is the phrase that came to me is we contain multitudes. And I will pass to Patty and Lorraine.
Mine would be possibilities.
And I just want to thank you for how much you care. And I can't see everybody. I'm trying to find someone that hasn't gone. Andy.
My word, I think because I have a screen full of little post-it notes in front of me, but mosaics, you know, like all of our stories, all of our comments, like mosaics. Ying, has Ying gone?
Yeah, my words are anchoring, balancing, and gratitude. Thank you. And I don't know who else actually who still has not gone yet.
Rosa?
I think it would be coming back to me then. Thanks so much, Ying. Thank you so much, everybody who has shown up and who has contributed and participated, which is all of you. So my word is gratitude. Oh, Kevin, have you not gone? Oh,
Kevin
you did.
went.
Okay. All right. So my word is gratitude, heartfelt gratitude, and possibility, like the possibilities that are opened by heartfelt gratitude. So thank you. Andy or Natalia, would either of you care to remind us of when the next one is? Because I don't have that at the top of my mind right now.
Next is Wednesday, November 29th. So that's the third and final session of this celebratory gathering. And it's on appreciating the evolutionary edge and what social innovations have been calling to you these days. So if you feel called to join us, please do.
Appreciating what?
The evolutionary edge.
Yeah.
And there will be more gatherings too. We're already cooking up some, but this is like the third of this planned 3-part series. So yeah.
And as Tom mentioned also on the Friday before that, I think it's, what is it? The Friday, the 24th, I think, we are having a session. It's around about Thanksgiving time, so it may not be appropriate or easy to get to, but if you can and you want to, we're going to be doing a deep dive into 2 patterns of appreciative thinking and capacitance. So you're welcome to join us then.
Right.
And if you want to receive, so since you're here today, you're probably already signed up for the Tao of Democracy gatherings, but if you want the invites and the links to some of the other gatherings, remember to subscribe to the CII newsletter, which is on our website, and I'll grab that link and pop it in the chat, just in case any of you aren't already on there.
And that's different from my newsletter. So
yes,
if you're on mine, you might not be on that.
So I think
have a good September weekend
tonight, today, this morning, whatever your time zone is. Thanks for being with us. I think we're gonna close the call now. Is that right? And
well, we like having soft endings, so you know, anyone who needs to go can go, and anybody who wants to just chat for a little bit, but we're not going to stay on for very long. So
take care,
everyone.
Thank you.